So for any of you who don't know who Josh Alexander is, I first met and encountered Josh, I think it would have been either interviewing you on my show or maybe in a Zoom call with James Kitchen, who's the chief litigator for Liberty Coalition Canada. But essentially, we had heard of a young student who was suspended from school for a certain period of time and then eventually banned from being on school property for the egregious crime of planning a protest that hadn't happened yet because the principal of the school failed to protect girls from boys who were going into the girls' bathroom. So Josh first brought a complaint to the principal, and the principal said, well, this is your crusade, and show me a girl who disagrees. And so that's what Josh did. And I got to interview her as well. And here's the girl saying to the principal, yeah, there's boys in the girls' bathroom. And so the principal, the soy coward that he is, said, well, I'm not going to do anything anyways. And so in response, Josh, I think rightfully planned a walkout protest as a way of communicating this is wrong, we don't support it. And in anticipation of the protest, it didn't even happen yet, Josh was suspended and then eventually told he couldn't come back to school because the quote-unquote trans students felt threatened by his presence. So Josh connected with Liberty Coalition Canada, and we decided we would represent him and fight for him because we agree not only with what he believes, but his take on. Even prior to connecting with us, I found out later that Josh was quite heavily involved with protest and work with the Freedom Convoy in Ottawa, and I was there as well for a lot of it. Our paths didn't cross then, but Josh has been an example of the kind of person I was talking about earlier, that here's what's right, here's faithfulness. It's difficult, it's costly, it won't be well received, it comes at a penalty, and he's been willing to pay that cost, and he's been willing to deal with the scorn. And as a result, I think he's helped to awaken a lot of Canadians to what's going on, specifically in the public education system, but also just to what's happening more broadly in our country. So it's been a joy for me to get to know Josh, to hang out with him, whether it's at his family's place and having dinner and talking theology, or spending time in Ottawa for the 1-year anniversary of the Freedom Convoy, or just being able to be alongside him at protests outside of libraries for Drag Queen Story Hours. So we've been able to do some things together, and it's been great for us to support him and fight for him as well. So please welcome Josh Alexander. Well, young man, it's good to see you.
Good to see you.
I love the color of the shirt. I don't have any burgundy shirts. I don't know how else to. If I did, I would have wore it, or gone to Value Village and grabbed a jacket or something. So, Josh, I have some questions here that I think it's good for us to discuss, and then maybe depending on the answers, we can branch off into some others as well. And then I think there's going to be a time after for people to ask questions. Is that correct? Is there a nod from Ken? Okay, good. So one of the things that I mentioned in my talk was the necessity of kids and grandkids of younger generations being politically engaged and involved with the Christian Heritage Party. And the CHP wants to and needs to attract younger Christians. And younger could be relative. I think I'm, generally speaking, a younger Christian in this room. So as someone who's been involved in the cultural, political sphere, I mean, you've been able to chat with several politicians. You crashed the CPC convention, which was great. What are the things that you think would be effective in attracting like-minded younger believers, passionate about their faith, passionate about cultural, political engagement, to be interested and involved with the CHP?
Well, I think the number one thing that needs to be recognized by the party and by Christians in general is what voting actually is intended to be. And the common mistake many people make is that it's just this tactical decision they're going to make where they choose the greater of two evils and hope for the best. When you look back in history, that's not what it was. We had moral guidelines that the candidates strive to achieve and to fit within, and the people would make an honorable decision about who they felt was best to lead the nation, and that was a meaningful decision. But at this point, we have millions of people throwing away their vote to some evil, pathetic man, whether that's a guy like Justin Trudeau or a guy like Pierre Poilievre, or really anything in between. So I think that's important that we understand that a vote is actually a personal endorsement of this individual. We can't complain and gripe about the state of our nation when we decided to vote for these people, or vote for people that refuse to oppose the leaders that we currently have, and the evil decisions that they make. So I think that we need to focus more on educating people about voting and the decision that you're actually making before God, and how you're going to have to stand and answer for that. So I think that's a big one, and just focusing more on the family and the church than on the political system. The Christian Heritage Party, I think you would agree, is not the solution, but is the vessel for the solution to make its way into the federal government.
So I'm thinking about what is it that draws people to certain leaders or certain parties. So maybe, I guess I'll frame it this way. In terms of, let's say, specific candidates who might be running, whether it's what they say, how they operate, how they're involved, how their policy, what's the sort of thing that draws people, and let's say specifically, younger people. It's such a vague category, but let's say people in their 20s, right? Late teens, 20s, maybe early 30s. What do you think are the sort of things that draws that generation or that age group of people to a certain candidate, whether it's good or bad? So I guess what I want to get at is not so much the policies they support, but what is it that would draw someone to candidate A or candidate B? And I guess part of the answer to that question is to say to people who would be running, not to change who they are, but to think about what is it in terms of how I present myself or how I engage, which will have a drawing as opposed to repelling effect on people from their late teens to late 20s.
Yeah, I think no matter what you do, as long as you're doing something and it's right and it's making a scene, and Christians should be making a scene right now. It's an embarrassment how the church has been so quiet, and so Christian politicians need to certainly be making quite a ruckus, and that is going to push people away. But at the same time, you're going to have the extreme reaction on the other end, where people see somebody that's taken what is sadly now considered a radical stance, and they're going to be firm on that and not move. And that will end up getting supporters, not as many as we would like, but we need energy, and we need more radical decisions being made and more radical stances being taken, instead of a passive approach.
I think that's good. When I first met you, when I first heard about you, one of the things that I remember chatting with friends was, what are his parents like? Like, where did this guy come from? And then as I got to meet your brother, Nick, I'm like, okay, really, like what is happening? What is mixed into the cake in the Alexander home? And I was very glad to spend a couple days at your house with your family, hanging out, leading up to an interview that we did together. And then I found myself saying, oh, okay, yeah, that's why. And I really, really appreciated and like your parents and even the discussion we were able to have. So I got to see it. I got to witness, okay, that's why these young men are the way that they are. It makes sense. But for everyone who wasn't invited to your place for a sleepover and out for dinner, maybe you can share with them a little bit about, younger formative years, but what were, like, specifically some of the values or the things inculcated into you from your parents that made you do what really should just be the normal kind of thing, but in our culture is this brave, heroic thing, which it is. But I guess share a little bit about that, a little bit about growing up in the family and the things that have led to who you are today.
Yeah, I would say that my parents did an excellent job on giving us foundational Christian beliefs, putting us in an environment where we could grow. But also, you can have that and still be influenced by evil around you, and that's something we see, whether it's shows on Netflix or whatnot, that a lot of Christians still allow into their homes. And my parents were very diligent in making sure that first off, that didn't enter the home, and secondly, when that was spotted, that it was pointed out that that is evil, and not that it's just something that our family doesn't support or that we don't do, but that it was actually spiritual warfare. And I think that was very important. But they sacrificed a lot in choosing to homeschool us and keep us out of the education system until we were ready to enter it and be a witness to students around us and challenge mainstream narratives that are an attack on our faith. And I think that's another lesson that a lot of parents can take. Don't send vulnerable students into a situation where they're just going to be groomed on and abused by the staff members and fellow students, and it's a ridiculous mess that my parents thankfully spared me from. And because of that, I was then able to go in and be a witness to many students, and obviously that wasn't taken very well, but I was able to give the gospel to millions because of that.
So I'll boil those. You said three things, and if you weren't paying attention, let me just boil them down. The importance of a biblical world and life view, of the Word of God being foundational for how we view things, being able to spot and call out evil and lies in the culture, in media, and draw awareness to that. Nate Wright, who's going to be speaking here tomorrow, I don't know if he'll mention this, but he plays this really great game with his kids that if they're watching a movie, the game he plays is called Spot the Lie. And so the whole point of this is if you have something in the movie, like a particular scene, like Disney movies, which don't watch Disney movies with your kids, but if you do, there's this streak of rebelling against your parents. I know what's right. It's my life. To hell with what my dad says. Who cares that he's the Sultan overseeing an entire nation and my mom's not here, which means he's on double duty and there's a lot of stress. I don't care about him. I got a whole new world to go, right? But saying to your kids, what's the lie? What's the lie there? That's important. So that's number two. And then the third thing is taking seriously the education of kids, which means don't putting them in state-funded indoctrination centers. So I think those are three very, very helpful points to consider. What do you think are some of the things holding Christians back from being salt and light and engaging the way that they need to? I mean, especially as someone is yourself, you've been a public figure, you've been at protests and events, you're out there, and I'm sure that you, like me many times, shake my head in disappointment saying, where are the people that should be here? What is it that's preventing them from just saying what needs to be said, which is basically true and honest, but still they hold back from fulfilling their duty to be salt and light? Maybe one or two things that you've observed are holding Christians back from engaging the way they need to.
I would say obviously it's fear and passivity. I mean, again, going back to my parents, not only did they raise my brother and me and the rest of my siblings, but they also, when the time came and were handed an opt-out, they refused it, and they chose to stand for what was right, and have lost their jobs and had a much different life since then. And so when I look around at the churches we went to and the Christians that supposedly invested in our lives, and the time actually came where something was on the line, no one was to be found. And it just shows you how fake a lot of modern Christianity is. It's a contemporary cult almost, where people gather and they do this thing out of tradition, and there's no heart in it, and there's no risk or investment in it, and other than maybe $50 a month given in the basket. And it's really sad. Christians need to recognize that we are in spiritual warfare. The fate of the nation is at hand, and we need to stand up and make some sacrifices now for greater reward, and serve the King.
So you said something there which is interesting and I think important to note, that even though in time you paid the cost for your faithfulness before your parents did, which is also them being faithful unto Christ, the fact that they were still willing to pay the cost, that just doesn't come out of nowhere. It's not the case that you were obedient and then well, I guess we need to be obedient. That clearly they set that example and it was just their time after. So I think that's an important principle, that if you want your kids to be ready to pay the cost that Christ will have them pay for faithfulness, you need to be ready to do it yourself, even though it might not happen before them. I think your kids will pick up on that. I think your kids will know that mom and dad are ready to go all the way for Jesus if I need, which will equip them to do so. And then in your case, they also had to pay a cost because of their faithfulness. So I think that's something worth noting. There's been tremendous support of you and your stance initially, and even subsequently, the work that you've been doing with Save Canada, and clearly there's Christian support. Now, it's also the case that there are many professing Christians who not only they don't just disagree, but they oppose it for various reasons. What would you say would be one or two of the biggest complaints or biggest reasons that people would say, this is why what you're doing is wrong, or this is why you shouldn't be doing what you're doing? What are some of the main arguments that, again, I don't care about the world, they hate Jesus, but those who profess Christ, who oppose and disagree, what do they say? How do they say that you're wrong?
Well, I can give an example, a couple actually. Shortly after I was kicked out of my school, there was a letter signed by 30 different churches in the Renfrew County. The Renfrew County's not too big an area, and even so, it's the most conservative riding in Canadian history. And so the amount of churches that were willing to put out this public statement was just disheartening. But then again, my very own church, who didn't sign the letter, but when privately asked by a member of the church for prayer, the pastor said that he felt what I was doing was very dangerous, and he wasn't going to announce any of what was going on in the area as a prayer request. So he wouldn't even petition the Heavenly Father about it because he was too afraid to. So I can't enter into that realm of thinking. That all I can go off is what I'm told. They think I'm dangerous. They think I am. They think I've gone off the rails and am really a bad example to other Christians, which is stupid. That's about all I can say. It's a very cowardice stance, and I really don't envy those people on Judgment Day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when James Coates was arrested, I remember there were several other pastors and friends, and we wanted to pray for him, send him something, maybe gather around other pastors to meet and pray for him. And the general response was, no, we're not going to even meet to pray for a guy who's in prison with his wife and 2 kids who are still at home. But also we need to support him. There was actually an act of speaking against, and I know that there were articles written, you had these Christian pastors who at this point disqualified themselves, who were speaking to pagan news outlets about how James and Tim Stevens were bringing reproach on the gospel. It's a very sad reality that they don't even have to like throw money at you, but even just to here's a professing brother, just to pray for you. The fact that they wouldn't do that, it feels to me like the religious leaders in John's gospel when they bring Jesus over to Pilate and say, well, if he didn't do anything wrong, we wouldn't have brought him to you. We're a friend of Caesar. We don't want to get under Caesar's bad. We're not on Caesar's bad list. So that's the Christian response, the for and against. But what about other, let's say, religious groups, maybe in general, but Muslims or Buddhists, Hindus? I think about, for example, the Million March for Children that happened. There's a little bit of variety there, but how have you found the response from non-Christian religious groups, let's say specifically those who would support you? What are some of the things they've said? How have they encouraged you? Or what's the grounds for their support, even though they would disagree on a lot of theological issues?
Yeah, the only other religion that has supported me is the Muslims. And that was during the Million Man March. We saw a lot of that where I met with some imams and all that. And I mean, I faced backlash from a lot of Christians for that because they said, why are you joining a Muslim movement? And I said, I'm not joining a Muslim movement. Muslims are joining a Christian movement and you are left behind. So I faced a lot of backlash for that. They said I was compromising on the gospel, which is pretty hard to do when you're marching down the street, handing out Bibles and preaching the gospel to Muslims and everybody around you. So they were definitely supportive, but you also have to recognize that Muslims are, by nature, it's in the Quran that they are very manipulative, and they will do whatever they can to get Western Christians and really anybody on their side to make them think they're peaceable and all that. So you definitely have to see through that as well. But they were supportive because they do have a more traditional stance. And they do still recognize that the perversion that is being pushed on children is completely wrong, and they don't want it pushed on their kids. They'd rather push other rhetoric on them, and that's their decision to make. We'll just have to keep pushing the gospel at them. But that's I receive support from them. I probably eat too much jerky for any other religion out there, but the Muslims and the Christians were the only religious category that would come forward.
And then the agnostic, right? I would say I've lost almost all of those at this point because over time I'd have like organizations like Gays Against Groomers or just individuals all over the place that would say, hey, I'm a homosexual male and I don't support the like all this stuff, and I'm like, that's just it's such a silly stance to go behind a Christian man and say that you support him and then freak out when I espouse Christian beliefs. And that's what happened with you got Melissa Lantsman and a few other politicians that I criticized. I said we don't need sodomy in Canadian politics. And that obviously made the Christian churches that have refused to stand very irritated, and it made the Conservative Party agitated, and they've cut ties with me. In fact, there was an order, a party whip, not to talk about some of the things I had said and the controversies I had made, and it's really quite an embarrassment. So yeah, I would say I've lost almost all of the secular right wing because of my stance on these moral issues that are facing our country. So I think there's something valuable there for us to consider, which is there will be people on several issues where they will be co-belligerents, like not allies, because allies have the same goal in mind, which is Christ ruling over Canada. But they're co-belligerents in that they work together maybe for lesser causes on the way there. But we can't be so committed to numbers that we compromise, and we need to be bold in our faith. And if that means that we eventually lose the co-belligerent, we don't drive them out, but if we eventually lose the support of the person who doesn't line up in all ways, that doesn't mean we compromise on our faith, and we have to be willing to suffer that loss as well. I saw that as well after the whole Freedom Convoy thing. I had people reach out, oh, you're a pastor. Maybe I should think about your church. What do you think about LGBT stuff? And then I would tell them. And then apparently I'm just as bad as Trudeau for being a tyrant. So that divide, that freedom divide, is definitely there. How would you speak to how would you humbly and wisely as a younger man speak to the elder or preacher or pastor or church? So if you're sitting down, some pastors like, I disagree with you. We shouldn't talk about politics in the church. We don't talk about the politics stuff. We don't talk about the voting stuff. But for some reason, he invites you over for, I don't know, coffee or tea or chocolate milk, whatever. So what do you say to him? So you have his ear. How do you approach this believer, this elder, this older man thinking, I disagree with what you're doing. I disagree with Christians talking and engaging in politics. How would you carefully and lovingly say, well, here's why?
Well, I think my number one approach is I don't ask a pastor or an elder to be campaigning in the pulpit Sunday morning, but I do ask a pastor to be more of a leader than just on Sunday morning. His job is to shepherd a flock, and that isn't just on Sunday. And so the church is a living body that ought to be making differences in the world right now and evangelizing and giving the gospel and protecting the innocent, and that's not something we're seeing. There's little to no evangelism happening anywhere, and there's millions of babies being murdered every year, and nobody says a thing about it. And our children are being groomed and having perverse ideology shoved down their throats, and the shepherds stand around and don't do anything about it. So it's not about pushing a political campaign. It's about teaching and guiding and preaching against what is wrong.
You've had many, and we've talked about this before, you've had countless students or groups of students who've wanted to say, hey, can you come to our school? We want to do this event. I mean, I know of several. I mean, there was a whole cohort of students in Huntsville and then in Ingersoll earlier this year, in light of Pride Comes Before the Fall Month, wanting to do their own walkout, their own protest. You're gonna raise the sodomite flag. We're gonna go away. So we've seen a little bit of this, and you've had people. There's a lot of students, young people, supporting you, doing their own protests, wearing the "There Are Only Two Genders" shirt, which they've been getting suspended for. So we've seen this, which is encouraging, and I think one of the hopes that we'd had, especially as we said, okay, here's one young man being bold in public. Hopefully that will embolden some others. Talk to me a little bit about that, about what you've seen in kind of your cohort, students in elementary and even in high school across the country. How have they been, I guess the left would say radicalized, but we would say engaged, rightfully so, in things that they didn't see their parents do this, right? They haven't been witnessing this kind of political, cultural engagement. So talk a little bit about some of the good stuff that you'd be seeing really across the country. Let's go coast to coast. Where have you seen, or how have you seen this springing up among younger people to be serious and intentional about their engagement?
Yeah, I think there is a natural understanding amongst young people that sodomy is wrong. I mean, our society tries to esteem it as the highest and most noble trait that an individual can have, and it's been worshipped by the masses for the last several years. But at the end of the day, when you're standing in the locker room with students and there's talk going on, it's not looked at fondly. And I remember the first time I was in the public board when this happened, the first time a pride flag went off, and they put it up on on the same flagpole as the Canadian flag, breaking flag code. And Monty was there. He's in the back there. I remember we went up, and we were standing in a washroom before school started, and one of the kids comes in and says what just happened, that they raised the pride flag. And I think it was the next day in the same spot, all these students met, and there was there was a kid that brought garden shears, there was a kid that brought a can of butane, and another kid that brought matches and all sorts of stuff. And these kids were like, let's go charge the pole and rip it down and burn it. And I said, well, just hold on for a minute. I'm going to go meet with the principal.
Yeah, at least wait until it gets dark before you do that.
Well, so I went and I talked with the principal, and I remember telling him, I was like, I don't think you understand the response from the students here. There is currently a team waiting to go destroy that perverted symbol. I said, you're actually breaking the law by flying it. You're violating our national flag code. So they did end up taking it down, and they put it up on a pole right next to it. So anyways, I do know it did end up getting vandalized, but that just goes to show that is the immediate natural response from young people. They don't want this garbage being pushed. But then at the same time, they are naive, and after years of indoctrination, you do get a lot of woke radicals. So it definitely can be discouraging to see what has happened to our generation, but I wouldn't say all hope is lost. I mean, we've traveled the country, me and my team. We've gone to schools all over the place where at sometimes there's hundreds of students coming out to meet us, and we're able to give them the gospel and give them Bibles. And I remember even one time that we were in Calgary at a school that it was a protest that Liberty Coalition organized, and I was standing out there, and it was pretty tense. There were students that were supportive and that were there to meet me, and then there was another crowd that was just kind of there to watch and observe or even argue with me. And then, of course, there's BLM and Antifa. And this crowd wasn't very open to what I was saying. I didn't get to say much before the police arrested me, but after they watched me get attacked and arrested, and then walk right back to them after I got released with a squad of riot police on my tail, they were much more receptive because they saw the length I was willing to go to share the message I had for them. And I think that definitely makes a difference, and I got to have many productive conversations that day. And it shows that the young mind is malleable, and it isn't too late for us to turn this narrative around and, I mean, start restoring the nation.
Bravo. It might not seem like it to everyone, but there is a whole generation of younger people that are passionate about these things, are just waiting to be directed. And the truth is, it's going to be us who get in the way. I won't name names here, but I was contacted by a group of churches in the Huntsville area because a couple students were suspended for wearing their only two gender shirts. And someone was involved in making the shirts, and it was just really, we interviewed this person, and we had to cover their face and mimic their voice, and that's fine. Like, I'm not going to dox anyone, but this was all the students. It was all from them that this came. And the parents were like, okay, sure, go do your thing, right? Like, we're not going to stand in the way. And then they planned, and I was talking with some of the pastors there and some of the parents. I'm like, listen, why not they were planning this big walkout at the end of the year, right before exams. And it was going to be huge, huge. And the kids were all for it. And they were looking to their parents for, oh, can we go ahead? What if it gets bad and you support us? And they were ready to be faithful. And it was parents and the pastors who stood in and said, oh, I don't know. And, what if you get suspended and you get kicked out of school, which would probably be the best thing in the world for them to get out of that godless whatever. So, but if they're ready, there's a generation of younger people that believe what you're saying about things the right way, that love the Lord, that need the right direction and guidance of us, and not to get in the way, and not to teach them to be lazy and fearful and apathetic, but to say to them, listen, go pay the cost. I got your back. It'll be fine. It'll be fine. We'll figure this out together. And you've seen that. You've seen that. I've seen that as well. How would you encourage the people sitting here moving forward? So represented in this room, you have candidates, you have people who are part of EDAs, you may have just members who are very supportive. So we have a little bit of an audience here, kind of recognizing that some people are running, some people are supporting, some people are involved, with the party in various levels of leadership. So here's this kind of varied audience. In closing, if there's a way that, regardless of kind of their roles, how you would encourage them, challenge them, as you perceive what's happening in our country, as you look at what's down the road, how would you spur them on to faithfulness, regardless of their station, regardless of their position, to really do the work that we need to be doing for the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years?
I think the number one thing is obviously to be fearless, to be ruthless with what you believe. Don't worry too much about the people you're going to lose over a couple offensive statements. The truth is offensive, and you're going to lose people about it, which I'm sure you all know. And I think what you said earlier is very important about getting other family members in and other young people involved. Young people do need leaders and they do need sages, but they'll often only go to the sage with a group of fellow people their age. They do need to be led there and pointed there by other young men and young women, and we need to involve we need to involve more. I would say we need to involve more scripture in in our narrative, in our message, because whatever God has said, He's saying it better than we will. And as a Christian Heritage Party, that really should be what we're espousing: God's word and God's plan and God's message. So I think that leading with that and presenting it clear and plain gospel is incredibly important. And just bring forth energy and a fearless, righteous rebellion.
Well, that's all I have for set questions. I know it's a little bit earlier than the allotted time, but I would anticipate there will probably be ample questions. There's one already. I see that hand. It's Sunday morning. I see that hand.
All right, here you go, Suzette.
Thanks, Ken. Josh, the biggest question is, how can we help you?
Currently, I think the best method to do that would be, one, you could talk to my dad in the suit. My family did get hit pretty hard by everything that happened, and obviously Liberty Coalition Canada, who's representing me in court right now. My next court date will be in November. They can't do that for free, so they definitely do need some financial support in this.
Okay, so just to clarify, so to support you and your parents as well, like through the Liberty, to donate to the Liberty Coalition's legal fund, right?
Liberty Coalition's for my current case, but I would also send people to go talk to my dad there, if there anybody feels led to help.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you. True.
being thrown into the spotlight like you were so suddenly, what's it been like emotionally and spiritually for you, and how has your faith grown through it?
I would say the number one thing over time, now kind of looking back on a bit of it, as there's been a little bit of time for rest, would be, well, I've grown a lot in my faith through it, just seeing how God has worked through it, but also I've come to learn as I've matured in my faith that not everybody is called to take as public a stance. We all need to be non-conforming in our daily life, but for me it did take some time to recognize that it isn't everybody's job to be on CBC News getting arrested, and it really isn't going to help if all of us are in jail. But I think that was important for me, and just learning that God does have a calling on all of our lives, and it can be different for each and every one of us.
So I'm going to briefly do a little political sidestep and make a comment, but you can ask, is it not true, or would you not agree with, there's the question, that it's totally legitimate, and this is a message that I want to give to young people, and you would probably agree with this. It's totally legitimate, and it's actually vital that the children of the generation exceed their parents in their righteousness, I call it generational sanctification. But if we're going to get out of this mire, the children have to exceed. Sometimes it says in Scripture, the student is not above the master. But when it comes to sinful parenting, and we're all guilty of that, our children need to exceed. We actually have to call out of them, I have failed here, here, and here. Learn from this, and then do more. And I think that's what we need to acknowledge, those of us with children, and then call out of our children that exceeding something larger, something greater.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, with every generation, we get to see the mistakes of the past generation, and we really have no excuse for repeating them, yet we always do. But yeah, I would definitely agree that each one of us should be striving for sanctification, and that we ought to try to do better than those before us, and honor those before us, but without arrogance, which we often see amongst young people, because they all think they're better than anybody who went before them, which is just the sad reality.
I just want to add to that quickly. We got to qualify what you mean, and I know what you mean, but I want to just make sure everyone's clear. The reality is that everyone's different in terms of giftings and abilities. So you might have a different set of gifts than your kids, and it might mean that there are certain opportunities that you would have that they won't have. It might also be the case that God's put different minds together, so the ability to, for example, memorize scripture, right, or to retain knowledge. It might be different from generation to generation. So the focus needs to be not, my kids need to know the Bible more than me. That just might not happen because of the way you've been put together. Or my kids need to have even more gifts to be able to serve than I do. That also might not happen. The way to think about it is, my kids, by God's grace, will possess a greater spiritual intensity in their pursuit of Christ than me. That's the way to think about it. That if I train them early in a way that I was not the beneficiary of, that they will have a deeper love for Christ, that they will have a greater intensity of their pursuit of Christ than I do, so that when they're 40, I can look back when I'm, between 70 and 75, when my kids are around 40, and look at them and say, they are so much more committed to the kingdom of God than even I was when I was 40, even though it feels like a lot for me. So just think about it that way. Not gifts, not abilities, not knowledge, but love for Christ as expressed in pursuit of him and intensity. That's what we want to see increased with subsequent generations.
I use the term righteousness.
Yeah.
Okay. Here's a question back here.
David Robbins reporting from India. I've been going to India for 26 years. Recently, there was a third time that Prime Minister Modi took the reins of government, but with a minority government. Under his leadership the last 8 years, the Christians have been persecuted more and more and more and more. And he's quite proud of it. And nobody hears about it. So during the last election, that year, there was an average of outbreaks against Christians 4 times a day throughout the country. And the most wonderful thing I can report to you is that the indigenous leaders that I work with and love as my dear brothers in Christ state to me often, the greater the persecution, the greater the growth of the church. We don't like that. We hate to hear that. I come back and I don't say it very often because we don't like to hear that. We ask the Lord to deliver us from persecution. But not in India. They don't think that way because it's so used to them. They're a lower schedule caste, lower schedule tribes, and nobody's going to stick up for them. If they called the police, they put them in jail. The people that complain about the mistreatment is put in jail, literally, even for years. So my brothers and sisters, let's change our minds. Persecution is not a hindrance. Let's take it like a man. And the church in India has grown from 2.7% to 11%, according to the India Mission Association, which is the largest mission association in the world. So let's take it from them. Even if you're a Baptist or Reformed or whatever you are, let's do it and pull together. Is that a question?
Thank you. Okay, this is going to be our last question. I'll give Juliana the last question here.
So for me, I'm looking at it, one of the main questions we have, and this isn't my question to you, is how do we reach out to the youth? And I think standing on principles, speaking the truth, but not only that, living it. And there are some ideas we have about kids. It's like, oh, kids hate rules and they like to push the rules, but kids love rules. They need that consistency and the stability. It's like that railing. They come up and test it. If it's wobbly, they don't feel safe. So they need that consistency, right? And so right now there are ideas that our youth don't want to get involved. They don't want to be out there. They don't want to deal with this. And so we're looking at a room full of older people thinking like, oh, well, it's hard and it's because the youth just don't want to get involved. And I just want your opinion on where the youth are. Do you think they want to get more involved or less involved?
I think the youth, like many others, are passive, unfortunately. They don't seem to quite understand the threat to the threat that has been posed to the West. I mean, my generation has been offered anything the world has on a silver platter, and we've just become completely addicted to vices and corrupted like nobody else before. And I think that it's going to be hard to break free from that, really the truth is that the only way we can be free from that is through the gospel. We wear the hat Save Canada, and a lot of people always ask me, how do you intend to save Canada? I'm like, I don't, but I know a guy who can. And like that gentleman over there was saying, persecution is something that will wake up people up. We've been sheltered way too long. I know that I was invited with Harold to Washington, D.C. to go to the National Prayer Meeting there. And I remember being in a room full of politicians where a lot of prayers were made, whether they were genuine or not, I don't know, but a lot of the most serious issues such as abortion were completely ignored, and it was really a virtue signal from American politicians. And my prayer that day was that the church would face persecution, because the church should be the number one enemy to evil in the world right now. We should be the government's number one enemy, and we're not. They're totally fine with us because we pose no threat to them. And we should stand up. We should be the number one threat to evil, and that will bring persecution, but it will also bring revival.
All right. Well, Josh and Andrew.
I need a bright red hat with my name on it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And so let's give them another round and then.